What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, February 14th, 2017. It is Valentine's Day, and if you forgot to get flowers and chocolate and goodie for your significant other, boy, are you in a world of hurt right now. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Well, the big news today is that General Michael Flynn, National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, has now resigned from the Trump administration. And all of this came out of this series of leaks that the corporate media used to just attack him. It's more indications of an attempt by the establishment to undermine the Trump White House. The issue, there is no legal issue. It is one of trust. And I guess Trump is trying to show that those who are not doing the job he thinks they ought to be doing are going to be fired. But only yesterday, Kellyanne Conway was saying Trump has full confidence in Flynn. So that's a huge, embarrassing setback. Again, all of this talk really comes under the heading of back-channel discussion. And they're now admitting there was no violation of the Logan Act. They're making a mountain out of a molehill that this guy had the chat. And again, this goes way beyond Michael Flynn himself. Story out of RINF.com where apparently an ex-Pentagon official interviewed in Russia Today is saying Flynn's resignation is a victory for the corporate media and the Democrats. They wanted to prove they can get anybody in Trump's administration that they want to. And even Trump is out there saying this is all being caused by somebody inside the White House who is leaking information they ought not to be. And that is certainly the case here. Trump has enemies within. Another article coming out of 12160.info, the CIA broke the law to take out its critic, General Flynn, and that too is also the truth. And apparently some of the leaking was itself even fraudulent because the New York Times ran a story attacking General Flynn with this supposed series of quotes from Flynn's Twitter account, and then it turned out the Twitter account in question was fake, and the New York Times has now removed the portion of the article that were including the tweets from this unverified account. But the damage is already done. The damage is already done, and again, we are seeing an entrenched political establishment, having lost the election, are still trying to defeat or destroy or weaken Donald Trump's administration. And at this point, anything coming out of the corporate media needs to be taken with a very tiny grain of salt here. Now, of course, following Flynn's resignation, the Democrats are all screaming that now there has to be a full investigation into the links between Donald Trump and Russia. They're back to that whole thing about Putin and Trump are swapping wet, sloppy kisses and helping each other and hugging each other and all the rest of it, even as Putin continues to invade Korea, according to one of the old biddies on Capitol Hill who can't keep her brain screwed on straight here. Now, alarmingly enough, apparently Russian insiders are expressing their fear that the Washington establishment is going to go ahead and assassinate Donald Trump, and that is something we need to be paying very close attention to because as of today, the director of the United States Secret Service, Joseph Clancy, has now resigned. Obviously, if you know the president is going to get whacked, you don't want to be the person in charge of the security detail that failed. So he is out. We are hearing yet more reports of a major White House shakeup, including the chief of staff. And again, Trump appears to be having difficulty getting control of his own White House. And I have a message for Donald Trump. I understand that you wanted to find what you thought were the most qualified people to be in your administration. But remember, you were voted into office because you're an outsider, And I suggest that the only way you're going to get the White House on your side is to start reaching out to other outsiders to come on in and fill those White House positions. People who are not going to be loyal to the previous presidents or to Hillary Clinton or to the money junkies or the war hawks. You need a clean sweep of our White House. Now, the Senate has finally confirmed Steve Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary. One Democrat actually broke party lines to go across and vote the confirmation through. And let's see, another report saying that Sean Spicer may be replaced in the very, very near future, which is kind of surprising. I thought he was doing a good job standing up to the corporate media. But there does seem to be a lot of chaos and confusion in the White House. It's not a good indicator. We're going to take a minute here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, over in Germany, there is growing opposition to Angela Merkel. Everybody's turned on her because of the economic hardship of being in the European Union, and especially because of this open borders policy. And at this point, the latest polls are showing Angela Merkel and her party are going to lose this next coming election. There's going to be a coalition of opposing parties uniting against her in this open border policy. And they're all Eurosceptics on top of it. Now, there's a very alarming story coming out of Russia today. And in the same week that Trump is saying he wants to be friends with Russia, he's now issuing a statement that he expects Russia to return Crimea. And basically, he's talking tough and addressing the resignation of National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Spicer came on out and said Russia seized Crimea under the Obama administration, and the Trump-appointed ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, has strongly denounced the Russian occupation. President Trump has made it very clear he expects the Russian government to de-escalate violence in the Ukraine and return Crimea. At the same time, he fully expects to and wants to get along with Russia. Those two statements are mutually exclusive, especially given that Russia did not annex Crimea and Russia is not involved in that eastern Ukrainian situation. This is an example of my concern about Trump, that too much of his worldview is based on what he gets from corporate media, has been getting corporate media for his entire life. Now, because of the election last year and what's going on this year in his administration, Trump has to understand the corporate media lies a lot. He needs to take a deep breath, step back, and ask, what else has he been lied to by the corporate media? And how much of his worldview is based on an illusion? Now, the contradiction between Trump saying he wants to be friends with Russia and talking tough about Ukraine and Crimea may be in response to these Democratic calls for an investigation of links between Putin and Trump. And we already know that Trump will say things that he reverses later on, like moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Now, Trump is still in that situation of having to court the Senate to get the rest of his confirmations through. And that means he has to convince the Senate war hawks that he's going to be tough on Russia. He's going to give them the war that they want. But the fact that those two statements are so diametrically opposite, it feels to me like maybe Trump has already sent a message to Putin saying, just ignore all the tough talk for right now, because I got to get my house under control. Now, apparently, David Shulkin has been confirmed to lead the Department of Veteran Affairs, and I do not envy that man his job. After all these years and all of this money, they still have not finished moving all the records onto a computer system. It's paper records. Veterans are being allowed to just literally wait until they die from their injuries and illnesses from the war zone. All right, let's grab some phone calls here. The phone lines are loading up here. Bob in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear. I can hear you.
I'm disappointed with this resignation of Flynn, which Trump accepted. Trump appears weak, craven, the corporate media, there's blood in the water. They're going to just keep up this attack. He should have just thumbed his nose at them and said, this is an inside the Beltway story. Nobody cares about this in the real America. Nobody cares about Flynn's phone call with the Russian ambassador. It's just, I'm very disappointed. I mean, this was supposed to be the year of the independent media, and the deep state and the shadow government and the corporate media has won.
Well, they've won this hand. They've won this hand. They haven't won the war. Overall, they're obviously in decline. But we have to expect they're going to fight back as hard as they can. They're going to play dirty. And I agree, Donald Trump should have stood firm on this issue. But again, he's getting advice from a lot of the people inside the White House who are not loyal to him, who are still loyal to the established order that is trying to regain control over the country.
Right. And even when Conway made that statement yesterday, that's like a general manager expressing support for a head coach, and the next day he's fired. So it was predictable that Flynn was going to go.
Well, I misinterpreted it. I called this one wrong. When Kellyanne Conway came out with that comment about Trump has full faith and confidence in Flynn, I figured that was the point where Trump was saying this is none of your business. Again, unfortunately, I think Donald Trump played this one very, very badly. And you're right, the corporate media is going to be pounding on him for being weak, even though Trump basically was engineered to do what they wanted by all of this leaking and spin and misreporting. And again, the New York Times was posting completely bogus quotes from a Twitter feed that didn't actually belong to Michael Flynn. So this whole thing was just a complete BS job from top to bottom, and Trump fell for it. And as I've been saying, even before he won the election, my biggest concern about him is he came into the White House as dangerously naive about just how dirty Washington, D.C. politics can be, as Jimmy Carter did. And Jimmy Carter was just absolutely not prepared for all the underhanded dealings that led to him being a single-term president.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't believe anything on the corporate media, but there was a story that Flynn allegedly lied to Vice President Pence and told him that sanctions weren't even discussed in this conversation, but they were. It came out later that they were, and that was the reason why he resigned. And I think there was a headline in the New York Times that Trump had eroding confidence in Flynn.
They're saying it's a trust issue. It's not a legal issue. And from Trump's point of view, I can understand that because he's dealing with a lot of people in his own White House that he's now learning he cannot trust. And Flynn just happened to be the first one to feel the hatchet fall. And it could also be that Trump has decided he's going to lop off Michael Flynn to send a message to the rest of the White House. You either fall in line or you're going to be gone as well.
Yeah. Oh, Mike, to change the subject, those protesters who were arrested in Washington, the 209, I believe,
yes,
who were arrested for the violence on Inauguration Day, can't the police question them over their funding, their funding links, especially with respect to this potential Soros link?
They can. They should. I hope they are. I think the FBI's gotten involved in this investigation, and yeah, they ought to be following the money back and finding out what's going on. But what's really interesting is already the corporate media is trying to protect him because apparently Politico has now scrubbed all the articles on their website that linked this Soros ties to this anti-Trump group trying to mobilize all these nationwide protests. So the corporate media is already protecting him.
Yeah. Oh, and it was also nice to hear that Washington State Attorney General reference the Constitution. It's funny, when one of theirs is in the White House, the Constitution's forgotten. But as soon as a Republican is in the White House, the Constitution suddenly reappears.
Yeah, but except that he was completely off the mark here. There is nothing in the Constitution that gives a foreign national living outside the United States of America any kind of a right to come here without restriction. It's not there. I've read that Constitution many, many times, and it's just not there. And we do have that Title VIII provision that gives the president the right to ban certain classes of aliens if he sees them as a threat to national security. We know that 72 of the people who have been charged for plans of terrorism in the United States came from that list of countries. All 5 previous presidents used that same Title 8 provision. Nobody ever complained about them. This is just an outright biased attack by the corporate media and the entrenched establishment against Donald Trump. They are clearly afraid of this man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact that he mentioned the Constitution, but, I mean, you're right, he was incorrect, but with this crowd, it's a living, quote-unquote, living document. So for them, they'll basically read that right into the document, that these non-citizens have a constitutional right to come to the United States.
Well, they'll weasel word it. They'll go back and they say, well, we're sure the Founding Fathers meant to say this, and therefore that's what we're going to go on. But I think that was one of the reasons the liberals hated Scalia so much. He was a strict constitutionalist. If it's in the Constitution, it's legal.
Right.
If it's not in the Constitution, you can't add it in there. A lot of people, when they learn about the Bill of Rights, they don't really pay enough attention to the 9th and 10th Amendments, which are basically the locks saying the government cannot assume any new authorities, and any authorities that are not specifically enumerated to the government belong to the people. And those were the amendments that were in there to keep the government from getting too big for its britches, which it's obviously done at this point.
Right. Oh, I just want to say this. William Crystal attacked the white working class as being lazy. Were they lazy when they were out fighting for Israel in those wars of aggression in Iraq, in Libya, and Syria? Were they lazy then? I'd like to ask him. No, I guess they're of no use to him now that those wars are over.
Well, no, what it is,
it's
economic. It's economic. What they want to do is get rid of the American population that wants decent wages and salaries in order to bring in these workers who will work for pennies a day. But again, you cannot support a consumer economy if the workers aren't making enough money to go into those shopping malls and buy whatever it is that you are selling. And why this very basic truism about economics doesn't seem to settle into the money junkies' heads is an absolute mystery to me.
Right. But it's those white working class kids that are, for the most part, doing the fighting over there.
Yes.
So, not the scumbag elites like William Crystal. So, all right. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
Doing fine.
Mike, I am really angry, boy. I'll tell you. I didn't want to, I wasn't even going to listen to you today. I had something else planned. But after what happened last night, I was so angry, and so disappointed, disgusted with Trump. I think he's showing weakness to the first degree. Just when his enemies are circling at him, you don't give in to the enemy when he attacks you like that. You fight him with everything you got. What he should do, and this is the CIA, by the way, leaking stuff, which is illegal. Now, what he should do, first of all, is pardon Ed Snowden just on that alone, because Snowden warned about phone calls and all that, and this proves Snowden right. The second thing he should do, I don't think he has the power to disband the CIA. I think only Congress can do that. But what he can do, and this is Mike Flynn's agency when he was in the military, is take all or most of the duties of the CIA and transfer it over to the military, to the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Well, that's what John F. Kennedy tried to do. Following the Bay of Pigs.
Don't try to do it.
Hang on. Let me give you a little bit of backstory here. The president does have the authority to do that with an executive order. John F. Kennedy tried to do it following the Bay of Pigs when he realized the CIA had lied to him and set him up for that huge embarrassment. But unfortunately, his executive order was never carried out due to what is politely called bureaucratic resistance. And, of course, shortly thereafter, Kennedy was assassinated.
Well, if he works it out that's again why he should have kept Flynn. Another reason he should have kept Flynn.
I agree he should have kept Flynn. I absolutely agree with you. I don't know what possessed him to do that about face last night. He's getting bad advice, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What the problem is he's got all these mainstream Republicans.
Okay, Mark, I'm going to put you on hold. Mark, I'm going to put you on hold. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Would help to put up the master volume here. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Mark in North Carolina. You had something else you wanted to say.
Yeah, he is so surrounded by neocons and mainstream Republicans and others that do him no good.
Yeah, and again, this is where he's come in to the presidency not really aware of how Washington, D.C. politics works. See, Donald Trump comes from the world of business where if you hire your staff from your competitor, they will gladly go to work for you and do what you tell them and accept their salary and go home, not still be trying to do the business of their previous boss. I mean, look at my experience out of film. I work for this production company, and we do a movie, and we do a really great job, and we're all good friends and buddies. And then they have cutbacks, and I go to work for another computer animation company, and I work on their projects and take my money and go home. We're all still friends. And that's what Trump is expecting, that when he hires these people into his White House, they're going to do the job for him that he wants to have done. He's not used to this idea that he's bringing in people who have loyalty to somebody else outside the office. He's just not used to that. You don't really see that much of that kind of betrayal in the world of business. And if anybody from Trump's administration is listening to this show, please pass this along. He can't treat the White House as if it's one of his business ventures. It's a completely different universe, and it's very dark, and it's very dirty, and it's very nasty. And they are out for his blood right now.
There's one more thing, too, about the tentacles of the CIA. People think, they see these stupid movies about CIA agents and this and that, government employees and this and that. That's not what the CIA is about. There's a lot of people who work for the CIA that really are not directly employed by them. And one example is your fellow talk show host there, Glenn Beck, there's no question that he's involved. He was involved with that McMuffin or McMullen character that ran as an independent who is a supposedly quote-unquote ex-CIA agent.
Yeah.
He's obviously involved with them big time, and he even says in his show a lot of times, he warns, you better listen to these intelligence agencies because they will know how to deal with you otherwise, Mm-hmm. He is definitely a CIA, and he's a dangerous and very venomous individual that I think people need to be aware of and need to come after.
Well, I'm not going to encourage going after him or anything, but if you remember the history of the CIA's Operation Mockingbird, starting at the end of World War II, the CIA attempted to take control of all the available media of the day simply by having CIA assets in these top management positions. And again, the one brush I had with CIA was at CBS Television City out in Southern California, where I was not particularly impressed with them, and soon after lost my job at CBS Television City. And there's no doubt they're trying to do that with the independent media to grab the stars or to create stars, give them enough money where they can, have big studios and lots of equipment to get on out there in order to continue to try and control the discussion. The beauty of the independent media is there's thousands of us. There's too many to control.
When I say go after him, I don't mean go after him physically. I mean go after him on Twitter, go after him on Facebook, go after him on his website. Tell him and go and act and publicize, like I'm publicizing to you now, just how evil this man is and how controlled he is by the CIA, which I believe really is one of the most evil agencies, if not the most evil.
Well, I'll agree with you about I have to cut you off. We're coming up on a commercial break. I agree with you about the CIA. Sometimes they think they should be running the country. Other times they think they are running the country. But unless you can document a link between CIA and Glenn Beck, the statements you're making actually qualify as defamation. And so we need to be very, very cautious about that, or we're going to wind up being sued. So that's just the reality of the way these things are set up. Thanks an awful lot, Mark. We're going to let you go. And we've got other callers waiting on the line that I'm going to get to after the commercial break. But again, Donald Trump is as naive about going into the White House as Jimmy Carter was. He's not prepared for the way people behave there, and he needs to learn real quick because he's being fed bad information by people he thinks are working for him but are not. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones. George in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I could tell you the Trump White House fell on their sword for nothing.
Yeah, I think this was a bad, bad move.
And the thing is, the first thing I would have did if I were Trump and went in the White House, I just had a zero-tolerance policy towards insubordination. You know, you got these Obama holdovers, you got these neocons, and it's time to throw them out.
Well, I'm sure they're being.
The
I'm sure they're being very polite and respectful to Trump's face. You know, they're not doing anything that Trump can point to and say you're being insubordinate or disobedient and you're fired. You know, these are political masters of smiling at you at the same time they're knifing you in the back, and that is the lesson Trump has yet to learn about Washington D.C. society.
I mean, it's not like one of his businesses.
No, no, it isn't. His business acumen is now proving to be one of his major weaknesses because he's expecting people in the White House he's hiring to be businesslike, to behave like employers. You work for me now, you do what I tell you, and he's just not picking up on the fact that he has brought people into the White House who are still politically loyal to his enemies, and they're feeding him bad information, and they're leading him from misstep to misstep.
Well, I just hope, he gets the right people around him that know what. And I really think General Flynn resigning. I think he's to be more dangerous to the establishment now that he's outside than he was inside.
Could very well be. But I agree. This was a bad move for Trump to do. And the corporate media is going to just be pounding on this as a sign of his weakness and whatever. I mean, Donald Trump can't do anything that will look good in the eyes of the corporate media, he has to understand that right now. It doesn't matter what he does; it's going to be portrayed in the worst possible light. They are out to get him, and he should have learned his lesson when Chris Christie was trying to load up his campaign with all these neocon insiders, and he fired Chris Christie. And now it looks like he's going to fire Priebus, and there's going to be a major shakeup at the White House. But Trump needs to get people in there that he knows are loyal to Donald Trump and are not Obama holdovers. They're not plants by Hillary. They're not part of the Project for the New American Century. And all of the rest of that. He does need to do a complete fumigation of that building right now.
It's more like I say, anybody in the inside Washington Beltway that worked in the Beltway, I'm sorry, but they've been contaminated. And I'm just saying, you should start just bringing people from outside the Beltway.
He needs some outsiders. He needs some outsiders. Do you remember the legend of King Arthur of Camelot and his wizard Merlin? Do you know why Merlin was valuable to King Arthur? It wasn't because he could do magic tricks. It was because Merlin was the one person in Arthur's inner circle who could step outside the political strata and go on down, talk to the man on the street, talk to everybody at every level in society and build an accurate picture of what was going on, then go back to Arthur and say, this is what's really going on. Because any leader is going to be surrounded by a bunch of parasitic sycophants who are going to be telling the boss what is in their best interest for the boss to be thinking. And by the way, what they're trying to do to Donald Trump, they were doing that to John F. Kennedy as well. During that whole run-up before the actual assassination, they were trying to keep Kennedy absolutely misinformed about what was going on over in Vietnam. And that's why the job of Chief of Staff of the White House is so important, because that Chief of Staff of the White House is the one who controls access to the President, and if that Chief of Staff has their own agenda, then he's going to let the President see only those people that serve that agenda, and everybody else can just take a walk on over to the Library of Congress and read some books for a while.
Well, it just seems like Wright's previous agenda was to isolate Trump.
I think that's the agenda of every chief of staff, and any president who doesn't understand that, is a fool. But that's why so many presidents have had what they call the kitchen cabinet, which is a network of unofficial, non-Senate approved advisors who are outside the system, performing that same function as Merlin, talking with people in the street, talking with everybody outside the system to find out what's really going on. Because every president in that White House are surrounded by people who are trying to serve their own agenda in terms of controlling what information is flowing to the president. They see the president not as the leader and the boss. They see the president as an asset in their own political game.
Well, another thing President Trump has to do, hearing about what the State Department's doing, revolting, I just think there should be mass firings. I don't care if in all the bureaucracies, I don't care if the government functions, because one thing is, I think if the government is a little not functioning, I think that's better for us. You know,
well, here's where the technicalities come in. The president can fire any of his appointees, but to fire a regular federal government employee is a very long and complicated process, and Trump actually addressed that during his campaign, finding ways to streamline the ways to remove federal government workers who are not doing their job. And we've all heard the stories about how while Bernie Madoff was, cheating his investors out of $60 billion, the people over at the SEC were just sitting back and looking at porn on their taxpayer-funded computers because they know nothing can be done to them. They would have to kill a puppy on live national TV before somebody would say, maybe we need to find another opening for this guy or gal to be working in. I mean, it is very, very hard for a federal government employee to lose their job once they get it. And that's how the government builds the loyalty of their workers. Once you're with us for life. You got to really, really mess up before you get fired.
Well, as far as I think you should just fire all the appointees, the holdovers, because they're not doing this country any service. Okay,
well, all the appointees from Obama turned in their resignations on the inauguration day. That's a tradition, and Trump can either accept those resignations or reject them, and he did a few. But at this point, Trump is just really out of his depth dealing with Washington, D.C. politics. He's a successful businessman. He's used to dealing with people in a business-like manner. He's just not used to how dirty Washington, D.C. Can get politically. Anyway, Dustin, got to let you go. I'm sorry, this is George. George, got to let you go. We got a bunch of phone calls I need to get through and then get back to the real news. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Or was that Dustin we were talking to?
No, he's off. He may be muted.
I couldn't hear you.
He might be muted. Dustin, are you there?
Okay, well, if we don't have Dustin, we can't have silence. Let's go to Bill in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing, buddy?
Doing okay.
Hey, man. Love your show. Keep up the great work, man. We love you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to call about the General Flynn thing. He was like one of the real patriots we had that stood up with the Afghanistan stuff going on when he said enough's enough. We're not going to do your dirty work. Anyway, I really agree with you about, I love Donald Trump. I think he's a great, brave man for taking the job. But he really needs to start fighting fire with fire, like these neocons, John McCain, the Canary McCain and Lindsey Scam, the ones that are publicly out there literally working against him, and letting it be known through the media that they call him incompetent, this and that, and all this other stuff, and talking about he's, Russia's puppet and all this other stuff. I mean, he needs to reach out to them.
What's really amazing is the corporate media continues to ladle all these lies about Donald Trump, and then they get their knickers in a twist because the White House press spokesman doesn't want to take their questions ahead of everybody else. I mean, talk about arrogance of power.
Yeah, he really has to start cleaning the mess up because it's going to get worse. I mean, these neocons have got to go, even if he has to start his own investigative team, his own little personal, let's say Secret Service, because, I mean, these guys can't be hard to get some dirt on them to get them out of office. I mean, they got a lot of dirt on them with their political background, things that they've already done. It can't be that hard to get them out of office.
Well, I would sure like to see Trump give Trey Gowdy some authority as a special prosecutor looking into corruption in general, and that would really really kind of help the matters along there. All right, well, listen, Bill, thank you for the call. I'm going to clean up the phone lines because I need to get back to doing the news. We're going to switch over to Brendan in San Francisco. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I'll try to be quick. Just heard that Greece is allowing the first mosque to be built in who knows how long.
Yes.
That prompted me to go online and do some research, as I always do. And I found some very disturbing videos where these islands are being completely overrun by so-called refugees, Muslim migrants, whatever you want to call them.
Yes.
Throwing rocks at historic sites and buildings and harassing the locals. I mean, I've watched a lot of videos in my day, and this just shook me to the core of, like, the menacing element to it. And I'm telling you, man, I encourage people to go look for themselves, research it. I mean, this is just, they're going to leapfrog all the way across Europe, and we got to stop the flow.
Well, you know, on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com right now, there's a video. It's toward the bottom of the main page. Paris at War, Media Silence, and it's basically a collection of videos of all the rioting that is going on in France with the refugees, and it is a huge amount of violence in the street, and the corporate media is trying to keep you from seeing that's what's going on, because that's what's spreading across Europe, and that's what's going to come here to the United States of America. And
Right.
it's very obvious that for the people who are dreaming of a single global government, you know, chaos in the streets is their methodology, and they don't care how many people get killed or crippled, how many lives are ruined or destroyed for their ambitions. And I think by that definition, these are mentally ill people who are trying to bring about this new world order.
Correct. I think also Greece is a symbol for the rest of the world, the birthplace of democracy. If they can destroy that, the symbology of that is huge. Real quick, Mike, the phone screener, asked me about the dam out here in California up in Oroville.
Yes.
And I was listening to the Common Sense Report with Dave Hodges, and he had a guy on the ground over there speaking to some of the engineers, and he said if this rain continues, that dam will fail. And he said, moreover, Sacramento is going to be a disaster with their earth and levees. And I've known about that for years. They used to zone it so you couldn't build near the levees. And now they've gotten rid of all that. They're building condos, everything, right up to the levees in Sacramento. They say it's going to be worse than Katrina. And on that note, I'll let you go, Mike.
Okay, well, thank you. I didn't think the rain was supposed to really crank up until tomorrow, but if it's starting early, yeah, this is a horrible, horrible disaster. It's slow motion. We know something bad's going to happen. Nobody can do a thing about it. It's very, very frustrating. All right, let's see. We're going to switch over to Joe in California. Joe, you're going to be the last caller. Then we're going to close the lines for a while because I got a bunch of news I need to get to. What is on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to comment on all the leaks in Trump's White House and the fact that when Bill Clinton became president, they changed over the phone lines to whatever, I don't know, but when he was dealing with the Monica Lewinsky scandal, he made the comment that a foreign government is listening in on our calls. And, of course, I think that foreign government is in the Middle East.
Well, you're absolutely you're right about that, but for a little bit of clarification, the phone system that the Clintons put into the White House included private lines that were not being recorded, which normally business calls in the White House are supposed to be logged and transcripts because they're part of the public record and they belong to the American people. And the reason Bill Clinton's phone system was criticized is it had lines that were isolated and not being recorded, not being monitored. The people who were bugging the phone calls between Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky were doing it from her end over at the Watergate. She had an apartment in the Watergate complex, and they got it from that end. But there's a lot of bugging going on here, and of course, isn't it amazing how quickly the NSA could circle in on Flynn, but they couldn't find anything on Hillary's missing emails, and they certainly can't track down those computer criminals, can they? But by golly, they really showed their stuff with Michael Flynn.
Yeah, they've got their knives sharpened up for Trump.
Yeah, they really, really do, and Trump better wake up and realize he's not in Kansas any longer.
Okay, Mike, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to close the phone lines for a little bit here. Apparently, there has been a major discovery of oil and gas in Iran. They've found a dozen new oil fields that could produce 30 billion barrels of crude oil and 128 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. And so, boy, at this point, if they weren't thinking of invading Iran before, they sure as heck are now. How dare they build their country over our oil and gas? Oh, those gosh darn Iranians. Down in Venezuela, apparently CNN has aroused the ire of Nicolas Maduro with their inaccurate reporting. And basically, Maduro is now telling CNN, keep on out. You're sticking your nose in, you're manipulating, you're trying to influence the internal affairs of Venezuela. And so people are waking up to what CNN is really all about. And by the way, to show you just how ridiculous CNN can get, CNN actually put out the story that on the Grammys, Beyoncé's loss to Adele was entirely due to racism. That Beyoncé would have won if the Grammys weren't racist. I mean, that is just so over the top. I mean, even Beyoncé was saying Adele was doing wonderful work. But anything to push the agenda, anything to push the propaganda, oh, it's a racist society, those whites have to go, you blacks should raise on up and do whatever it is they're going to do. By the way, you remember that photo of the murdered Russian ambassador and his killer? It's been chosen as the World Press Photo of the Year. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. Oh, yes, we killed the Russian ambassador. That should be a famous photo enshrined in history. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And there is a new gate out there for us to pay attention to. It's being called Clickgate. And it's talking about this story that came out a few days ago where analysts discovered that roughly half of all the traffic at the corporate media's websites is being generated by Chinese botnets. In other words, they're artificially inflating their numbers to make it look like they're still in command of, a large audience. It's deceptive. It's certainly cheating their advertisers, and obviously the corporate media is never going to report on this anyway. But it's another sign of the decline of the corporate media, the erosion of the trust and confidence in the American people in our existing system. And again, there are so many parallels between what's going on today in the United States and events that transpired in the former Soviet Union just prior to its collapse. And Donald Trump could very well wind up being the very last president of the United States of America. All right. Martin Armstrong is out there looking at all of this rioting and protesting that's going on, and it all appears to be funded by George Soros organizations. And Armstrong is saying this is probably going to end in bloodshed. This is the biggest spike in civil unrest in American history. I remember some of the stuff back in the 60s as being on a very similar scale here. But I don't think Armstrong is comprehending that the general public of the United States is losing all sympathy for these whiners and criers out there. Remember, for any color revolution, for any revolution to succeed, it must have the support of the general population to bring about any substantive change. And the behavior of all of these illegals, liberals, whiners, they're turning people off. Look at what's been going on up at Oregon, where the police are now charging into these protesters for blocking traffic, and the local people are just cheering. They think it's great. They've had enough. They're sick and tired of all of this. Now, apparently, over in North Korea, Kim Jong-un's brother, Kim Jong-nam, has been assassinated in Malaysia. And Kim Jong-nam was actually the older brother of Kim Jong-un. A lot of people thought he was going to wind up with the leadership but he didn't, and he got in some legal troubles. And he's been very vocal, criticizing the North Korean government under his younger brother. And apparently he was at the Kuala Lumpur airport, and a woman walked up to him and sprayed him in the face with something, and then she fled. And then Kim Jong-nam started feeling ill. He went to the first aid station at the airport saying, "I'm really sick," and apparently died on the way to the hospital. So a lot of wet work going on, and that bodes ill for the future. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. We're going to keep the phone lines closed for a little while longer because we've got a lot of news to get through. We'll open them up a little bit further in the show, let you come in and have your say. Turning over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural, and it does seem like the whole world is just ready to have one big, let's bomb everybody, let God sort them out. And it is frightening, not to mention disgusting, to be seeing. Everyone's always worried about intelligent life in outer space. I wish we had some here. Now, ISIS is being pushed out of Syria and Iraq, but for some mysterious reason, they're gaining ground in Afghanistan. And Washington doesn't seem to be too concerned about that. Well, what has the U.S. government been using ISIS for? Getting rid of populist governments who are pushing back against American puppet rule. And up in Afghanistan, the Taliban has been making headway against the imposed junta that has brought with it, of course, a renewal of the opium trade, which the Taliban had eradicated. So ISIS has failed in Syria and Iraq. Let's send them up to Afghanistan. Let them get rid of the Taliban. So they're still out there playing these games, except that everybody now understands what they're doing. Now, Russian investigators are accusing Kiev of attacking civilians in eastern Ukraine using missiles equipped with high explosive fragmentation and cluster charges against residential areas. Now, if you're my age, you think of a weapon of mass destruction as being an atomic bomb. But the interesting thing is that term has been redefined to include much smaller things, including chemical weapons, biological weapons, and area dispersal weapons, including cluster bombs, fragmentation bombs. So technically, according to these Russian investigators, Kiev is using weapons of mass destruction against civilians in eastern Ukraine. Interesting article that came out of Sputnik News looking at what's going on in the European Union, where Brussels is talking about federalization and stricter control over the entire European area. And so this article is asking, is the European Union becoming the Fourth Reich? And I disagree. I would see the European Union becoming the Fifth Reich, but I think the Fourth Reich has already taken root here in the United States of America. If you look at the similarities in policies with Nazi expansionism, making up lies about other countries, invading them constantly, got concentration camps at places like Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, use of torture. Pretty scary here. Now then, as you know, the globalists, New World Orderists are in an absolute conniption over the possible victory of Marine Le Pen in the upcoming French elections. And they're pulling out all the stops to try and scare people away from her, saying that Marine Le Pen will destroy the European Union bloc. Well, for the people in France, that might not be a bad thing. Because, again, while the corporate media isn't covering it, this open borders refugee problem has just created chaos in the streets of France. And it's now starting to negatively impact their tourism industry. France relies very heavily on tourism. People want to go there. They want to see the Louvre. They want to see the Eiffel Tower. They want to follow the Da Vinci Code Trail and all the rest of that stuff. And they're staying away because of the violence. And so the European media is out there screaming that Le Pen is going to destroy the European Union economy. She's going to destroy the European Union. And already the corporate media is out there spinning, Russia is going to rig France's elections for Marine Le Pen. Boy, Russia's got to be really, really busy. They were rigging our elections. They're rigging the elections against Merkel. They're rigging the elections for Marine Le Pen. And, of course, not a single piece of evidence to support any of it. Germany's equivalent of the CIA investigated the claim that Russia was interfering with Germany's politics, and they said it's a fairy tale. It's an absolute fairy tale. But that's the constant theme in all of this propaganda coming out of the corporate media. Russia bad, Russia bad, Russia bad, Russia bad, Russia bad. They're trying so hard to bring back the old Cold War. They miss those good old days of the 1950s and 1960s where all they had to do was shout commie at you and you would wet yourself and salute the flag and fling your children and your money into the war machine. And you wouldn't argue, you wouldn't doubt, you wouldn't question. You were so obedient. Back during the last Cold War. That's why they're trying to bring up another one. They want to turn you back into that obedient mass that will just cower when you hear the word Russian and say, here, take my money, take the lives of my children, save me from those evil Russians. Been there, done that, didn't buy the T-shirt. Greece has basically fired a warning shot at the international banks that have it in a stranglehold, by saying they may drop the EU currency and start using the U.S. dollar. Now, obviously, the U.S. is going to be very happy with that because the trend lately has been for more and more countries to move away from the U.S. dollar. But Greece is getting into this attitude of the lesser of two evils, and right now they're seeing the U.S. dollar as a lesser evil than the continued predations of the European Central Bank. Boy, they have no idea. They need to remember it was Goldman Sachs, an American company based in New York, that created almost half of that debt they're dealing with right now. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Up in Germany, under the stress of having to prop up the rest of the EU and the skyrocketing, out-of-control costs of dealing with all of these refugees coming on in, Germany's economic growth has slowed, and now Merkel is looking at a dire economy going into her election. And they're all trying to blame it on Donald Trump. Oh, we're uncertain about Trump. We can't have a good economy because we don't know what Trump is going to do. Well, Trump is in charge of America's economy, not Europe's. If the European economy is falling apart, blame the European private central bankers. Because that entire system is a fraud and a scam. It is a system of enslavement. Because when you allow private central banks to create money out of thin air and loan it into circulation at interest, you will be their debt slaves until the end of time. Because the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to that private central bank than actually exists, and the situation never reverses. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter how much you sacrifice. You can never get out of debt to the private central bankers. It's designed that way. And the propaganda fed to you daily in the school and the corporate media is that debt represents something real and you must do what the holders of that debt tell you to do. It is a system of covert enslavement. And it needs to go. Now, there's a war over metals prices. And obviously, the people who are trading in gold want the prices to go on up. The people who are trading in paper equities and depositor banks want metals prices to stay down out of fear that people will empty those negative interest savings accounts, close out their stock portfolios, and preserve their wealth in metals. Peter Spina is out there saying it is the political and market uncertainty that's driving the rush for gold. And of course, when the price is being kept down artificially is a good time to be buying in. And get your wealth into something that is outside the computers of the bankers, financial institutions, and the government itself. If you don't have it under your own control, it can and will be taken from you. And again, everywhere that they're trying these experiments with cashless societies, coupled with them is a ban on private ownership of investment metals. They want to make you dependent on the banks. They want you to have to use the banks for all of your financial transactions so the banks can make more money off of you. And of course, the government knows where you're spending your money at all times. And most important, there can never be a run on the bank. Because if you go to the bank and say, give me my money, they say, well, there is no such thing as money anymore. All we can do is transfer it to another bank, and you can send it over there. And if all the banks are going down together, that's going to be a serious, serious problem. But the bankers aren't thinking what's best for society as a whole. The bankers are thinking about their money addiction. That's all they think about. I'm sure most of us have encountered addicts in our life, whether it's alcohol, prescription painkillers, meth, heroin, whatever they're addicted to. Once they're captured by their addiction, they don't see what their addiction does to those around them. They're oblivious to the harm their behavior is causing to everybody else around them, and the same thing is true for the money addicts. They will destroy our society before they understand society's problems go back to that money addiction. Now, 325 food and farm groups have united to urge, recently confirmed, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, to oppose any more of these big agricultural mega mergers. Because we're seeing in agriculture the same thing going on that went in the media a few years back. A few large corporations are being allowed to gobble it all up and create a monopoly. And once it is a monopoly under the control of just a few who are coordinating with each other, prices will go up, quality will go down. That's why we actually used to have anti-monopoly, antitrust laws in this country, because competition provides best prices and best quality to the consumer. And monopolies work exactly the opposite way. And again, the rise of mega monopolies is another sign that we have ceased being a capitalist economy decades ago, and we have slid off the edge of the cliff into pure economic fascism. And here is the little ironic piece of history. Vladimir Lenin predicted years and years and years ago, all the way back when they were setting up the socialist system in the Soviet Union, he predicted when Western capitalism failed that it would inevitably become fascistic in order to preserve the wealth and privilege of those at the top. Now, over at The Guardian, they had a photo essay, and it's on Rio's Olympic venues 6 months later. And they are hideously deteriorated, run down. They're not really being used. They're just sitting there in disrepair. And everybody is saying this is raising questions about the legacy organizers promised would benefit the Brazilian city and its residents. The hard truth is, every government that hosts the Olympics promises the people the games will be a benefit to their nation, and all of those new sports facilities will be used and appreciated by future generations. It rarely, if ever, works out that way. Most of those venues are abandoned. They're not used because not everybody's an Olympic athlete. There's one exception I can think of, and that's the Los Angeles Coliseum, which has seen 2 Olympics. And it has been regularly used following the Olympics, but prior to the last Olympics, which was what, 94 I think it was, it had to be refurbished because it too was already in a deteriorated state. They don't really build those things to last. Now, over at Toshiba, their CEO, their boss, has resigned over massive losses in their nuclear power projects. And Toshiba is basically saying they're having to report a net loss of $3.4 billion in the current fiscal year that ends next month. And it also warned the estimated loss could change by a wide margin, possibly doubling for its nuclear business. And apparently they acquired a nuclear construction firm by its Westinghouse unit, and I'll bet you most of you didn't know that Westinghouse is now owned by Toshiba, and that did not work out very well. Now, something that the liberals don't like to mention, certainly don't like the corporate media mention, is that there is, in fact, a certain degree of fraud within the welfare food stamp system. Ohio has come out with a really good idea. The Ohio State Auditor, David Yost, has found loopholes in the $2.5 billion food stamp program, leaving the door wide open for fraud. And they're going to fix it by requiring pictures on the actual EBT cards so that they can only be used by the people who qualify for the food assistance, rather than just be handed around and used over and over and over again. And I think that's a very, very good idea. And we're going to hear screaming from the liberals, oh, you can't do that. Now, over in Cologne, Germany, and again, they are also dealing with huge problems of protests, rioting, violence, sex crimes caused by this open borders policy. And now Cologne's cathedral is getting ready to have permanent security at the cathedral. And they're going to impose certain security requirements. If you are going into the Cologne Cathedral to pray to the imaginary playmate in the sky, your bags will be searched. You'll have to go through metal detectors. And Germany is in utter chaos because the refugees are burning down their own refugee centers. Because when they left to migrate to Germany, they were told they were going to be given free houses, free cars, all kinds of free stuff. They were made all these promises to get them to make that trip into Europe. They're not getting all that free stuff. They're angry, and they're taking out their anger on the refugee centers, saying, we're not going to stay here. We're going to burn this down. Where's my free house now? What a can of worms Soros has opened on all of Europe and the United States. And by the way, here's where it gets really interesting. Some of the first Syrian refugees that have come to Germany and are trying to assimilate into German society are now saying that Merkel has brought too many migrants in. And for those migrants who are trying to adapt and assimilate into the society, the negative image of these other refugees who are burning their refugee centers and carrying out sex crimes, they don't want to be tarnished by it. And so those first Syrian refugees are saying, okay, we're here, shut the door. It's time to shut that door. Apparently, the latest polls are showing 2/3 of the German voters are saying there needs to be a new chancellor. At this point, even Diebold and Hillary's vote stealers are not going to be able to save Angela Merkel. By the way, you know this so-called Jewish rally for refugees, which was an anti-Trump rally. Apparently, their organizer was funded originally by the Obama government to resettle refugees. They're taking the money that was supposed to be spent to resettle the refugees, and they're organizing these protests and rallies. I think that's a misappropriation of the money. But what's really insane was how they're trying to equate this travel moratorium with the Third Reich. They're trying to cast Trump as Adolf Hitler and bring back, this is the new Holocaust. It's the new Holocaust. Well, first of all, setting aside the fact that the story of the Holocaust appears to be an exaggeration, we're not dealing with a government that is targeting people who have lived their entire lives in this country and say, let's lock them up and put them in prison factories. We're talking about control of our borders. And this idea that borders should be gone, George Soros loves it. Look at the damage that is being done by it. And the propaganda is just getting totally hysterical when they're out there screaming about Nazis and Holocaust and Hitler and all the rest of this, which proves that this particular group of people is stuck in time. They are unable and unwilling to live with the rest of us here in the 21st century. And they are mentally stuck in the middle of the last century, even though most of them were not even born at that time. But that's their identity. Oh, yeah, Hitler. And you know what's kind of weird? Hitler wanted to be remembered forever, and Israel is giving him exactly what he wanted. I think we ought to just forget the guy. Anybody who does a bad job, let's forget about him. That's what they used to do in ancient Egypt. If you messed up as a pharaoh, carve your face right off the rocks, nobody remembers who you are. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, yesterday we were talking about how this Washington attorney who launched this whole thing to block Trump's travel moratorium was out there screaming that Donald Trump was in violation of the Constitution by saying that people who might be a threat to us can't come here. And I basically said, I challenge this Washington state attorney to show me where in the Constitution a foreign national living outside the United States of America has any right to come into our country without any restrictions. And to nobody's surprise whatsoever, I have not heard from him or from anybody else who can actually point to a place in the Constitution where it says foreign nationals living outside the United States of America have a right to come into our country without any restrictions. It is not there. And this individual up in Washington, like the corporate media, is hoping that you haven't actually read that Constitution, that you will just take their word for it, that it's unconstitutional, that, and all the rest of this stuff. Ben Garrison has a wonderful cartoon out where he's portraying the state of California as a cat lady. Now, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's almost become a stereotype where there'll be an old lady living alone, and she picks up stray cats until finally the house is just absolutely full of them. And it's full of cat poop, and the curtains are all scratched up, and the furniture's all destroyed, and she still wants to welcome more cats in. That's a very powerful image. I think it's a very, very good image that's out there. Now, down in Texas, they're getting ready to pass a bill outlawing sanctuary cities. And the bill is a very, very strong one. It will deny state funding to cities that refuse to follow the Constitution and Title VIII, refuse to cooperate with immigration authorities. And it carries civil and criminal penalties against civil servants who refuse to cooperate with the Immigration Customs Enforcement. And I'm sure the liberals are going to be whining and crying and, oh, you're being racist, you're being racist. No, we're not. Illegal isn't a race. I have to shake my head over this next one. I just don't get this. All right, remember Jerry Sandusky, former Pennsylvania State University football coach, and he was kicked out because he had been getting a little too friendly with some of the students under him. Apparently his son has now been arrested and charged with sexually assaulting a child. This is Jeffrey Sandusky. And apparently he was arraigned in a court in Pennsylvania just yesterday. And apparently Jeffrey Sandusky began this episode the same way that Anthony Weiner did, trading texts with this underage person asking for naked photographs. Apparently Sandusky was dating this kid's mother at the time, which is, it was weird. And apparently it got reported to the police and he got arrested. Now, I'd like to say maybe pedophilia is genetic, but in this case, Jeffrey's an adopted child. He just learned some bad lessons from his adopted father. I just don't get this. I just don't get this idea. There was one time when I sexted a photo of myself to my wife, but it was returned as junk mail. Claire's laughing in the other room. All righty. When we come on back, there is a horrible story here. I'm going to start it now, but we're going to have to come back to it after the commercial break. A pair of 3-month-old identical twins with no negative medical indications died simultaneously 2 days after receiving the so-called routine vaccinations. Identical twins. Get the shots, die 2 days later. Wait till you hear what the official verdict on this turned out to be. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about this very tragic story. A pair of identical twins, 3 months old, and they were given the so-called routine vaccinations. They had their second dose of the oral polio vaccine, DPT, and their first dose of the hepatitis B vaccines. The next day they had a fever. They were given a teaspoon of acetaminophen, and the next day they were found dead at the same time, lying on their back. And because the case was so rare, it was referred to a board of multidisciplinary medical professionals at the Institute of Forensic Medicine in the Ministry of Justice in Istanbul. And yet the board decided that both of these twins had died at the same moment of sudden infant death syndrome. Now, sudden infant death syndrome is defined as the baby dies all of a sudden and you can't find a reason. That's it. They shouldn't even call it syndrome. Syndrome implies a disease. But that's the fancy name to your kid is dead, we don't know why, deal with it. And the official position is, well, it was just an incredible stroke of bad luck that both of these identical twin, perfectly healthy kids just all of a sudden died 2 days after getting these shots. That's it. Now, the reality is that there have been several reports linking the hepatitis B vaccine to sudden infant death. And the DTaP vaccine, Pediatrix, actually have it inside their package inserts. Autism and SIDS are adverse effects of this vaccine. But of course, you're not told that on the commercials, and the doctors and nurses don't tell you that. You've got to read those package inserts. Now, when it first came on out that some of these vaccines package inserts acknowledged the possibility of autism and SIDS under adverse effects, the pharmaceutical companies came on out with this rather interesting piece of propaganda saying, well, look, you can take it from us. They don't really cause autism and SIDS. It's just our lawyers made us put it in there just in case. Now, these package inserts represent part of the process of FDA approval. And there is a database for all these pharmaceutical products at the FDA that you can search for adverse conditions, such as autism and SIDS. And that's what the marketers at the pharmaceutical companies are saying. The stuff is perfectly safe. It's just the lawyers and the government makes us do it. You don't have to listen to them. Now, Donald Trump has never had the flu shot. And he's never had the flu. Just a little something to keep in mind. All right, we're going to start taking phone calls. Alex in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I heard an economist the other day mention that he doesn't think that Trump's going to replace Obamacare. Have you heard anything about that?
I'm hearing that there's a huge amount of debate about it. Of course, the Democrats want to keep it right where it is. So do the health insurance corporations who are trying to make money off of it. And we have Democrats in Congress that are dedicated to preserving the legacy of Barack Obama, even for things that aren't working. And I think any objective observer has to realize Obamacare was a disaster. First of all, from that way too expensive website that never worked, to the fact that for the vast majority of the American people, this has been a raw deal. Our premiums are going up, skyrocketing, estimated 40% next year alone. And with the deductibles, most Americans will never actually use their Obamacare-compliant health insurance policies unless they have a major illness or accident. For your normal, yearly, I'm going to get ill, flus and whatnot stuff, you're never going to reach that deductible. And a lot of people were actually better off not having health insurance and just paying for the medical care out of their pocket. But, of course, the goal of Obamacare was to force you into buying these very expensive health insurance policies to make the health insurance companies rich, which is why the Internal Revenue Service now has that huge penalty for anybody who can't prove that they're buying those hideously expensive, useless health insurance policies.
Yes, I hate to think this, but I believe that the insurance companies that were in the marketplace only for a year, I think they raked in huge money, and I just think it's a scam. They're acting like they lost money, and I think that their business plan was probably let's make $1 trillion and just sit back and give it to our little subsidiary companies that are trying to get on board. I can't help but think that.
Well,
but anyway, I hope. What?
No, continue, please.
Anyway, I hope that it gets repealed. I want people to get health insurance, but it's astronomical. I just can't believe that he would leave it there. But maybe he will. I guess we'll find out what he's really about soon.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know. But again, I think he's surrounded by people, and he doesn't understand just because he is their boss and signing their paychecks, they are not, in fact, loyal to him. They are playing him on behalf of their political alliances outside the White House. I'd love to see a full auditing of the health insurance companies. Yes, they are publicly crying poor mouth, even to the point of demanding bailouts. But it's been a disaster all the way around, and I think it should be gotten rid of. I think we should bring back competition to the marketplace. And Obamacare basically allowed the health insurance companies to coordinate their pricing and their deductibles to deny the American people any kind of choice. Competition in business provides the best quality products at the lowest price to the ordinary people. We need to get back to that. Those farmers are right. We can't allow agriculture mega-mergers. We should break up the media monopolies. We've had antitrust, anti-monopoly laws in this country for a very, very, very good reason. We need to bring those back.
Yeah. Well, thanks to people like you and the independent media, I think we are breaking up the monopolized media right now.
I think so.
And I'd love to see it. So anyway, let's just see. It would stimulate the economy big time if people were saving $200 and $300 a month on their insurance.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
It would help me. It would help me a lot, I'll tell you that. I mean, and a lot of people, it would help a lot of people. That's a lot of money.
It is. It's a huge amount of money.
$300 a month is a lot of money.
You know, I mean,
think that they could save on average that.
Well, the American people are being plundered, and for a lot of Americans, it has literally come down to a case of they simply don't have the money to buy all the things they're being ordered to buy. And until somebody focuses on bringing new wealth into the system, the abuse and oppression of the American people is only going to get worse until the point where a real revolution does take root. And I don't want to see that. But again, at the very top of our society, we have people who are addicted to money. And they're not actually addicted to the ink and paper or even the numbers in the computer. What they're addicted to is that rush when they get more. And going on back to that wonderful documentary, Inside Job, there was they mentioned in there, scientists had gone into some of these Wall Street traders and they'd wired up their brains and discovered that every time the traders did a big score, the part of the brain that lit up is the same part of the brain that lights up when they're doing cocaine. And to nobody's surprise, there's a lot of cocaine abuse in Wall Street. And so that's what they're addicted to. The money they've already got is meaningless to them. The rush is getting more. And that is what has created such instability in our financial centers, and deregulation is only going to make it worse.
I'll tell you what would bring competition immediately would be the public option, if we just had that choice. You know?
Yes.
I think that would bring the competition. It would be similar to the U.S. Post Office compared to FedEx and UPS.
Well, the post office is now bankrupt, so I'm not sure that's a good model. But again, look at some of the healthcare systems they have in Europe, in places like France and especially Norway. And, you know, in these countries in Europe, they have high taxes, but you get value for money. You get free education, assisted education, subsidized health care, all of these other benefits. Here in the United States, we've got the worst of both worlds. We've got sky-high taxation, and then we're expected to borrow our money to go to school at interest. We're expected to pay our own medical costs. And I think Americans really need to look at all the money they're pouring into the government at all levels and say, are we really getting value for money? Because government is the most expensive thing you will ever be forced to buy in your entire life. What are you actually getting from it in terms of a real benefit, as opposed to constant proclamations about how much we love you and we're taking care of you and we're protecting you from the wild elephant invasion and all this other nonsense that's out there? What we really need in this country is a lemon law for the government itself, where we take our bloated, expensive, costly, impossible-to-use government, we send it over to the junkyard, and we crunch it up into a metal coffee table, and then we all get a check for $10,000 with which to buy a newer, smaller, more efficient government to replace it. I think it's time that we actually have that kind of an approach.
Exactly, and get rid of the centralized bank, as you've always said.
That's the root of all the evil. It's the root of all the evil.
We need to tell them. We need to tell them we do not owe you the money that you're saying we owe you. You need to go to jail.
Well, you know, the private central banks, they make their deals with the government. I mean, look at that scam they did up in Canada, where Canada's central bank is actually owned by the Canadian people, and according to its charter, it's supposed to provide interest-free loans for Canadian infrastructure. But starting in the 1970s, the Canadian government started borrowing money for infrastructure development at interest and stuck the Canadian taxpayers with that bill. And so from the point of view of the bankers, they're saying, look, your government, authorized to act on your behalf by virtue of the ballot box, decided to borrow their money from us at interest, and that's just, you're going to have to deal with that. Debt is debt. Debt is holy. Debt is sacrosanct. It doesn't matter how it comes on about. Ellen Brown has pointed out correctly that with Trump's plans for infrastructure improvement in this country, that if he were using his authority as president to order the Treasury to issue an interest-free value-based currency to fund the infrastructure work, it would cut the actual cost of all of these projects literally in half. Because when you look at the amortized interest on all of these loans, you come to find on out the private central banks are making as much money off of any effort as those who actually do the work. And all in exchange for ink and paper, for their computerized permission, their leave for you to do what you want to do. That's it.
Yeah, just think if the government provided us loans for homes interest-free, where that's just a fee and you have to pay it over 12 years, it would stimulate the economy. Our mortgages would be the same amount every month, but we'd be able to pay them in 12 years. And it would, anything that's for we the people, we're done. They're not interested in benefiting us.
No, they're not. And going on back to the mortgage-backed security fraud meltdown in 2008, everything the government did was absolutely the wrong thing to do to solve the real problem. Instead, the solution with TARP and bailouts and QE and all the rest of it was to take trillions of dollars away from the American people and give it to the banks who'd made this mess so the banks could loan it back to the American people at interest, which was a raw deal any way you look at it. And as it turned out, most of those banks pocketed much of that money as these out-of-control bonuses. And so it really is looting and pillaging and plundering the American people.
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad. Do you ever listen to Mark Blythe? He's an economist professor from Brown University.
No, but I probably ought to.
Yeah, I heard him the other night. He was basically saying that the Eurozone, they're in trouble, but they can't, it's hard for any of the countries to really leave it. They have to have a commitment for like 5 or 7 years to really have their own austerity to get through with it, because they really don't have a currency to go to.
Well, I know that Germany reportedly a few years ago started printing up a new mark note, and they have them warehoused. And I think probably, if they're smart, the other EU member states are doing that. Only yesterday we were hearing where Ireland is being advised to start printing up a domestic currency and have it on standby in case things fall apart. I would even suggest that for the states in the United States against the collapse of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, it would be nice if Greece got the Olympics there. Maybe we could help them, like, rebuild their economy with that.
Well, yeah, but as I pointed on out, you know, Olympics actually is not going to rebuild their economy. It may be a death blow to it. Look what happened down in Rio. Go on out and just Google a lot of these Olympic venues, and they've just deteriorated. They're having to be torn down, and the Olympics are not a moneymaker. It looks like it because everybody's out there buying T-shirts and flags and buttons and the rest of it, but it never really covers the huge cost to set the event up. I'll tell you what we really ought to have. We ought to have, like the United Nations is a permanent fixture on some part of the globe, we ought to have 2 permanent Olympic venues that are reused over and over and over again, one for the summer games, one for the winter games, and just everybody understands we're going to the Olympics, and we're not going to be building a whole new Olympic village every 4 years or every 2 years, and just letting it rot on the landscape. I think that's what the Olympics ought to be thinking about, are 2 permanent Olympic venues that are maintained at a much lower cost over time than simply rebuilding from scratch every single time.
Yeah, that's a great idea. You should submit that to them.
They don't listen to me. Idea. They don't listen to me. Remember, I'm part of the arm of Russian propaganda, according to the Washington Compost. So they're not going to listen to me.
Say one more.
Go ahead.
Hey, Michael, I want to say one more thing that I tell Democrats when they start talking that Russia propaganda stuff. I tell them, if you think that our CIA and the Democratic Party had actual evidence that Putin overthrew our government using Donald Trump, if you think they had actual evidence of that, you're crazy.
Well, if they had actual evidence of it, they would have produced it. Back when they were first making the accusations, they would have said, we've got evidence. But these days, I don't care what the CIA says, it's going to be fake anyway. They've destroyed their credibility as well. Yeah. Thank you for the phone call. Alex, we're going to have to let you go. Back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Andy in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Michael. Listen, we've got a lot of stuff before us, but one of the things I wanted to ask you was, as far as your job and whatnot, are you getting tired of untying the knots of the corporate media?
Well,
they tie a whole bunch of knots and whatnot, and you have to get on air and untie these things and actually give us the truth. That's the first question. I got another one.
Well, it's fatiguing, and I have to be very honest. When I started my first blog going on 24 years ago, I never expected it was going to last all that long, because at that point the issue was, it was obvious Vincent Foster had been murdered, and I wanted it investigated as a murder. See something, say something. I'm sure you've heard that. And then, of course, I got blacklisted out of Hollywood, and since I had all this free time on my hand, I just kept on looking, and that's when I sort of came to my own great awakening that the world, the nation, the United States, is not at all what we think it is based on what we're taught in school and what's on the corporate media. And it is kind of dark and ugly out there. And yes, I'm very tired, but at this point, I don't feel I'm in a position where I can, like, quit or retire at this point.
Well, okay, so I guess the next question is how do you feel? And I know I already got a really good grasp on what you're about to answer this question with. But how do you feel about all these corporations that, such as Wells Fargo, Wachovia, and their drug dealing and their laundering of money, J.P. Morgan, MF Global, Goldman Sachs, HSBC? These people get away with everything. So how do you actually feel about these people who are above the law? They are literally above the law. You go to jail for a simple DUI. And you get an ungodly amount of bail put over your head, so you can't get out and whatnot. But these people, we just pay a $110 million fine, and it actually goes back to themselves because they are part of the central bank and stuff. This is ridiculous. How do you feel about that?
Well, obviously it is not what we are taught this nation is supposed to be. We're taught that this nation is still, as designed by the Founding Fathers, a nation where the rule of law applies equally to everybody, and there are supposed to be checks and balances to keep things under control. Now, I was aware that certain people occasionally evade the law. I'm not going to declare them as a class above the law. Some of the things I saw when I was working in the film industry, where I saw people getting away with some very, very terrible things, but because they were big stars and large amounts of money were dependent on them continuing doing what they were doing, deals were made, and deals do get made. And as long as we have a government that is tolerant of this kind of behavior, it's only going to get worse. Remember, fascism is when the greed of corporations and government power are aligned together against the general population, and that's exactly where we are right now. Anyway, I need to let you go. We got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. I'm going to step back a little bit to this issue of immigration and customs enforcement, because we're just now finding out. The 7th U.S. Court of Appeals has ruled that immigrations and custom enforcement have full authority to deport illegal voters. And this is all coming out of a single lawsuit where a woman had come to the United States. She was illegal, and she voted apparently more than once, and her defense was that she'd been told it was okay. And it isn't. And so she's now headed back on home. And apparently this was spurred on by the state of Kansas coming on out and saying they had hundreds and hundreds of documented cases of illegals voting. And so that's not going anywhere immediately. All right, now we're getting word that Robert De Niro and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are planning an announcement at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. tomorrow morning. And it's about vaccines and mercury. And according to a media advisory, the two are planning on announcing a unique challenge with a substantial cash award to the American people and the media. Now, the corporate media probably won't touch it because they're already getting their substantial cash rewards from the advertising agencies for the big pharmaceuticals. But apparently the event is going to be live streamed from the World Mercury Project's website. And their goal is a world where mercury is no longer a threat to the health of our planet and our people. Now, here's the part that really has a lot of people scratching their heads. The FDA actually banned mercury-based preservatives like the Marisol back in, all the way in 1999, and yet it's still there. Why? Why no enforcement? It's a known neurotoxin. What is the reason they're continuing to put this in the vaccines, knowing that at the current rate of vaccine growth, by the year 2030, half of children will be diagnosed with autism. That means half the American population will be unavailable to the workforce, and a substantial part of the available workforce are going to be tied up caring for these autistic patients throughout their entire lifetime. And that means there are not going to be enough workers in other sectors of the economy to keep things really going. Where do we find the people in government who are thinking more than just a couple of years ahead? Because right now we really, really need them. Now, getting on back to this issue, as you know, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Has been a vaccine critic for a lot of years. He's heading up Donald Trump's Vaccine Safety Commission. Donald Trump may have a personal interest in it because of Barron Trump. And again, Trump himself is an anti-vaxxer. He's never had the flu shot, never gotten the flu. Now, Robert De Niro has an autistic child. And that was what motivated him to push for the documentary Vaxxed to be shown at the Tribeca Film Festival. And it was yanked under pressure from the financial backers of the film festival, who also have ties to the pharmaceutical industries. Same thing happened at the Houston International Film Festival and various other places. They're trying to keep the secret. They don't want to fix the problem. For whatever reason, they want to go on having these dangerous chemicals in the vaccines. They just don't want you to know about it. They seek a world where they can just pump whatever they want into your arm, and you're not allowed to know what's there, and you're not allowed to say no. For whatever their reason is, increased profitability, who knows? But we're going to be looking forward to this announcement, especially after that tragic story. 3-month-old identical twins died just 2 days after getting their recommended vaccines. Now, one of the issues that we hear from the pro-vaxxers is that, yeah, the mercury was supposed to be go away, but really there's so little mercury in a vaccine shot, it's really not going to be a problem. Well, it's a problem when you realize that right now the CDC is recommending over 30 different vaccinations for children. And states like California now make it mandatory. You can't have a religious exemption like the Amish do. The only way you can avoid being vaccinated is to have a doctor's note saying that you would suffer from the vaccines. And by the way, I am hearing from my sources within the medical community that a lot of doctors are doing that for their own children. They'll simply say, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this at all. Okay, and somebody just sent me the Crazy Cat action figure. It's a crazy lady doll, and there's something like 20 cat toys in the same box. Alrighty, now then, let's talk about human-caused global warming. But first, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And the snow is continuing to come on down here. Interesting story in Aspen Times saying that the January snows have created a where were you when moment. And we all know about that. When something really major happens, you know, in the future, they say, where were you when you found out Kennedy had been assassinated? Where were you when you found out the Challenger had exploded? These markers in the timeline of your history. And they're pointing to the heavy snows of January as being a marker that in the future people are going to say, wow, where were you in January 2017 when the snowfall was absolutely relentless? Non-stop for 3 weeks straight. Central Maine is still digging out from their big snowfall over the weekend. And apparently they're getting, with this last snowstorm, hundreds of flights to places like Boston and Providence, Rhode Island had to be delayed or canceled. Atlantic Canada being blasted by a powerful winter storm yesterday. Canceled flights, shuttered schools, municipal offices, everybody told to stay home. Another story coming out of Natural News talking about this bogus report that NOAA put together where they're claiming that global warming is happening all over the planet. And what's really interesting, according to Natural News, they took the map that NOAA put on out showing heat all over the place, and then they got hold of the map of the raw data. And much of the globe on the raw data map is blank. They don't have actual data for those locations. So they just filled it on in to be able to say, oh, see, we've got a nice, very expensively produced taxpayer-funded chart to prove that you icky-poo humans are still warming the world. And you shouldn't pay attention to all that snow and ice that's still coming on down out there. Now, talking about jumping the shark here, apparently over at Iowa State, some scientists have published an analysis that claims global warming is the root cause behind all these leftist riots that we're seeing across our country right now. It's all the fault of global warming. In the middle of winter, I would like to point out. But everybody's cashing in on the global warming thing. And I'll tell you how science actually works. 2 illustrations. If you're a scientist and you've seen an interesting phenomenon, and you put out a statement, I've discovered this interesting phenomenon, and it's probably not all that important, but it's still interesting, you will not get media attention. You will not get funding. If you put out a report saying, I've discovered this interesting phenomenon, and if left unstudied, it could destroy the world, then the media is going to pay attention to you, and funding will show up. The way that works with global warming, everybody knows there's a lot of funding out there for anything connected with global warming. So you could do a study about the cross-pollination of strawberries, and you want to do a grant proposal for that, and you're not going to get it. But if you rewrite it to say, I'm studying the cross-pollination of strawberries as influenced by global warming, then you will get your funding. That's how science is corrupted by politics. Just figure out a way to put global warming in there, you will get your money. And I imagine over at Iowa State, they were simply looking at reasons that for all this violence, and they don't want to say it's all bought and paid for by George Soros. And I know, we'll blame it on global warming. We'll get media attention. We'll be famous for a day. All right, let's talk about computers and computer technology. And apparently, ransomware is just out of control. According to a recent IBM security study, 40% of all spam emails contain ransomware. You absolutely need to not just click on anything that looks interesting, because they're written to be enticing. Your free bikini calendar, or your desktop screensaver of whatever it is that interests you. And obviously the incentives of the hackers are pretty straightforward. They're looking for a big payday. And a lot of corporations, companies, institutions are forced to make the payment because they can't take the time to reconstitute their system from backup. That's why hospitals have become a prime target for the ransomware writers. Because without access to those computerized records, and by the way, it was mandated all hospital records be computerized as part of Obamacare, because you can't hack a file folder. So the hospitals are paying up. And apparently nearly 70% of business victims surveyed by the IBM security study say they had to pay the hackers to recover the data. It's completely out of control. Now, of course, Neil Jenkins over at the Homeland Security Department, or the Department of Homeland Security, rather, saying from the U.S. government perspective, we definitely discourage the payment of ransom. Oh, okay. What are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? Why isn't the NSA tracking these people down and nailing them to a cross on live TV? Is the NSA complicit or merely incompetent? And the two are not mutually exclusive. Remember, the Kaspersky Group the Kaspersky computer security company identified the Equation Group as being NSA. The NSA has their own hacking teams out there. Maybe along with stealing all of the naked pictures of your significant other off of your computers, which Edward Snowden blew the whistle on. Maybe they're plundering all of these businesses for more money for luxury vacations. There's no oversight at the NSA. Nobody's keeping watch over there. I mean, if you look at the movie Snowden, it was just this out-of-control mindset over there. You know, we can do whatever we want, and nobody's going to stop us here. Now, the other problem that we law-abiding private citizens who value our privacy and our security are having to deal with is the battle of the botnets. And distributed denial of service attacks more than doubled in the last quarter of last year over the same period the year before. And some of that may be explainable by the DDoS attacks on independent media news websites like mine, which was and is still continuing to be hammered on occasion. And there are competing botnets out there. Now, the infamous Mirai low-T botnet accounted for most of the severe attacks. But apparently there's a new zombie network out there discovered by Akamai. And it can generate attacks greater than 100 gigabits per second. So they're out there. They're huge. And a lot of these botnets are basically available on the dark web for rent. So if you want to destroy somebody's website, you don't have to set it up yourself. You can go on out, pay with bitcoins or whatever on else to these groups, and they'll say, yes, for this many bitcoins, we will lock up their server for this many hours. And again, where's the NSA? Aren't they supposed to be protecting America's IT infrastructure from threat? When you look at the costs of computer crime, and coupled with the costs of the loss of productivity when your computers aren't working, this is a serious threat to the economy of the United States of America. Why is nothing being done about it? Now, apparently, Raytheon, which is a big military contractor, is teaming up with Utilidata to come up with a way to resist hackers. And obviously, they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They are planning on offering this as a big buck service to fellow corporations, not to you home users. So to heck with you. We can't make money off of you. We're not interested. And that's the reason this whole hacking ransomware thing is allowed to run wild. It's good for the economy, that old broken window analogy. We're forcing corporations to spend money on computer security, and that's taxable revenues. The fallacy of the broken window analogy is that nobody is just sitting on piles of money in this economy. And if a homeowner is forced to replace a broken window, he is spending money that probably would have been spent someplace else. Corporations that are induced to spend thousands of dollars on their computer security are spending money that probably would have gone somewhere else, like hiring a new employee, maybe. So this broken window analogy doesn't work. It's a zero-sum game. Now then, everybody's getting into artificial intelligence. They're already out there trying to commercialize it. And Google is working on their new artificially intelligent chatbot. They're calling it Cleverbot. And they're running tests on it to see if it can learn for itself and come to conclusions. And rather interestingly, when asked what the meaning of life was, Cleverbot said it's to serve the greater good. And then when they were asked, what is the purpose of living, Cleverbot responded, to live forever. Cleverbot was then asked again, what is the purpose of life? And it replied, my purpose is to forward my species. In other words, to make it easier for future generations of mankind to live. Seems a little blurred, but we seem to be getting onto the verge of AI systems with an instinct for reproduction, procreation. Now, if your computers in your business, or if you're well off in your home, if you have an enterprise class HGST UltraStar drive from Western Digital, you need to check with your Western Digital supplier, because apparently there is a batch of these disks that are failing very, very quickly, and they need to be replaced. Back up your data. I'd like to build a RAID array out of solid-state drives at some point in the future. Preserve my data that way. I'm doing it the old-fashioned way. Plug in USB terabyte disks here. All right, let's talk about Lake Oroville. And there's a rush to try and bolster the base of the emergency spillway, which eroded heavily when the dam overtopped it during the heavy rains. And they're flying in bags of rocks and just trying to put some substance there in case there's another overtopping in the face of new rains. Interestingly enough, the evacuation order has now been lifted, even though the warning remains. And according to this article that is over in Russia Today, California officials lifted the evacuation order for residents downstream of Oroville Dam, saying the dam may hold up to upcoming storms. May hold up to upcoming storms? If you don't know that for a fact, you're risking people's lives bringing them back in. Now, we had that caller earlier who said that already, apparently, there are heavy rains in the area. They weren't expecting them to start until tomorrow. This is a disaster waiting to happen. They don't really know how that emergency spillway has been damaged. If the reservoir fills up again, forget about the overtopping of the emergency reservoir. That whole section of that emergency spill could blow out, and then you've got a major, major problem downstream. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about the Oroville Dam. And again, I'm quoting from Russia Today. California officials have lifted the evacuation orders for the residents downstream of Oroville, saying the dam may hold up to upcoming storms. Now, I certainly hope they're right. But allowing people to go back to their homes when you're not 100% certain is inviting a tragedy of epic proportions. Now, apparently last week, this didn't get a lot of coverage because there weren't a lot of drowned bodies, but apparently in Nevada, in Elko County, they had a dam fail completely. And it's another earthen dam, just like the Oroville Dam. And it covered low-lying roads, and they had to reroute trains because some of the tracks were flooded. Now, here's a good one. This is out of Natural News. Oroville Dam emergency demonstrates how incompetent bureaucrats are marching California into catastrophic collapse at every level. And what they're talking about is when the evacuation order was issued, which was issued at a point in time where they thought the dam could collapse within the next hour, to nobody's surprise, everybody tried to evacuate at the same time, and the roads gridlocked, meaning they weren't really able to get out of the area in the time span that was being suggested. Now, wise and prudent government that is looking at infrastructure that could cause a calamity, and it's not like California has not had collapsed dams before, you have an evacuation plan where you pre-plan which communities move first, get them on the highways, get them down the highway, then get the next community moving and the next one to avoid that kind of a traffic jam. Why didn't Oroville have such a plan? Or if they had one, why was it not being followed? And worse, why did they wait until they thought the dam was within an hour of failing before ordering the evacuation? If they're not 100% convinced the dam is going to hold up to the coming storms, those people should not be allowed back in. And I understand what's going on. We already know Jerry Brown has got his hand out to the Trump administration for more money. Keeping these people out of their homes in these evacuation centers is costing lots and lots and lots of money, which I'm sure Jerry Brown would rather spend on transgender bathrooms and, supporting the illegal voters that are going to vote him into office next election. But he's thinking economically, he's thinking politically, and he's not thinking about humanity itself. By the way, speaking of handouts, apparently in Hollywood, which is very liberal and has not been shy about attacking Donald Trump during last year's campaign, they're actually in financial trouble as well. Their revenues are way, way down. People just don't want to go and see remakes of movies they've seen before, especially because the remakes are so politicized and liberalized as to be ridiculous. This attempt to revive the biblical epic has failed miserably. And now Hollywood is asking for a financial bailout from the Trump administration after spending all of last year attacking him. It's amazing. Getting on back to Oroville, if that dam were to collapse, and the unknown issue is how much erosion has taken place on the dam side of the concrete primary spillway, it would result in a 100-foot tall tsunami heading down toward Oroville. If it's just the emergency spillway that goes, there will be flooding, and it will be a major, major problem, especially if everybody is running and jamming up the freeways again. They could just drown right in their cars. It is not being handled very well, and more rain is on the way in. Okay, we're going to take another break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and boy, my comments before about the entire system is out for blood on Donald Trump. They're actually out there saying that Donald Trump ought to be impeached over Michael Flynn's communication with the Russian ambassador. Now, this is a bit of a reach because, first of all, Donald Trump was not in office at that time, but he had been the elected president. He was going on in there, and I am willing to bet a whole nickel that if you go back through history, you will find every elected president, before they actually formally take office, starting to make arrangements for what they're going to do. It's called the transition, people. And I shudder to think what the world's opinion of Washington, D.C. is right now, looking at all this childish behavior that's going on. And when you couple it with Nancy Pelosi's confusion of Crimea and Korea and Maxine Waters, it was Maxine Waters was confusing the two countries, and somebody said that they thought Bush was still the president. Boy, oh boy, I mean, if you're going to have puppet governments in front, people, can't you go to central casting and get somebody a little bit more together? But they're actually talking about trying to impeach Donald Trump over Michael Flynn's conversations with the Russian ambassador about the Russian sanctions. And again, unless an actual deal was struck, it's not a violation of the Logan Act. And everybody's allowed to talk about everything. That's what the First Amendment is all about. Flynn wasn't the national security advisor at the time. He was a private citizen. Technically, so was Donald Trump. It is amazing. All right, now then. If you're in London and you are skilled with a computer and you need a job, Buckingham Palace has just posted a job opening that pays £30,000 per year for somebody to come on in and run Queen Elizabeth's official Twitter account. And here I was thinking that all these big-name celebrities were doing their actual tweeting themselves. Apparently not. That's £30,000 there. On a more serious note, demand for safe, healthy, organic food is creating a new gold rush for producers. Those people who have farms that have not been contaminated by GMO pollen or who are not allowing their product to be adulterated with various and sundry chemicals are just seeing a huge demand for their product, and they're able to charge premium prices. And apparently 2015 saw a 12% rise in organic sales over the previous year. And apparently organic spending has risen by 72% since 2008. Right now, only 1% of farmland in the United States is dedicated to organic production. Everything else is contaminated with GMO pollen and all kinds of chemicals. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Alex in San Antonio. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was calling. I don't know if you had perhaps already touched on this point or not, but I was calling because, with everything going on on shaky ground with the Trump administration, I just wanted to say if he doesn't start sending people to jail soon, he's going to lose a lot of credibility, and he might be impeached. Because if things don't gain ground in a position where he's showing some type of leadership, and he's showing that he really means business, and some of these people really are going to jail, he's going to start to lose credibility and the little clout that he still has.
I would agree with you absolutely on that one. He should have made Trey Gowdy the Attorney General, and I don't know why he didn't, but he didn't. And anyway, there are people who need to go to jail. Unfortunately, there are way too many of them, and they are all now aligned together against Donald Trump in order that they not go to jail, even to the point of carrying out, his assassination. We have to understand and accept that the vast majority, we have to understand and accept the vast majority of our federal government are corrupted, totally corrupted. And a lot of it goes back to that CIA drug and gun running. And the CIA has been involved in illegal drug running and sales to our kids, going back at least to Vietnam, if not earlier than that.
No, I definitely agree, Mike, which is why I say if he doesn't do something about it soon, I hate to say it, but I mean, it looks like they're going to impeach him. They're going to find some type of ground to hold on to something, and I think this whole media play, I think they have a foothold on at least on how they can attack him, and since there's really nothing to defend him with,
Okay, well, let's back up here a little bit. Let's back up here a little tiny bit here. With a GOP-dominated House, the possibility of an impeachment actually happening is remote in the extreme. But what the Democrats can keep on doing is just trying to impeach and trying to impeach and trying to impeach in order to basically keep Trump tangled up with all of this nonsense. And force him to be constantly defending himself so that he's not able to change any of the liberal globalist agenda. But again, at this point, the federal government is literally starting to delegitimize itself, not just in the eyes of the rest of the world, but in the eyes of the American people. This is not what we expect our government to be doing, fighting amongst itself and neglecting the country as a whole. And for all this talk about unity and coming together after the election, it's obviously not happening.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. But I have to say it's been both sides. The Trump supporters, they've been gloating most of the time instead of doing things. Obviously, the left, it doesn't lend itself to be loved or liked or appreciated in any way. But I mean, after we won the election, I hate to say it, but most of us just kept calling them buttercups, and we really didn't do anything to show or express that we were welcoming them into a union.
They didn't want to be welcomed. They didn't want to be welcomed. I mean, we're not. Hang on. Okay, we're not the ones who are out there rioting in the streets and breaking the windows and everything. We would like to get along with everybody, pull the country back together, and move forward to get something effective actually done, with our nation. But unfortunately, it's not up to us anymore. These liberals, these George Soros-funded people are out there to cause chaos because Soros is hoping with enough chaos the government will come down and they can start building the New World Order here on what used to be the United States of America.
No, like I said, Mike, I don't disagree with you. I just think that it's been a failure of intention on both sides. One side isn't better than the other, and then at the end of the day, we're all in this together, no matter what.
Well, I do disagree with you. I do disagree with you because the failure of intention is definitely on the side of the liberals who tried to cheat and steal the election for Hillary Clinton, and when they didn't succeed, they tried that recount thing. Now they're talking impeachment. These are people who do not feel that they have to play by the rules, And by default, that means they don't feel like they need to get along with the rest of the American people. And there's a reality here that everybody needs to accept. Donald Trump won the election by the rules everybody agreed to play by going into that election, and you don't get to change the results retroactively through violence. That makes you a criminal. And I do agree that Donald Trump does need to start coming down hard. He needs to get his own house in order. It clearly is not at the moment. And then he needs to start grabbing some of these people. He needs to go after Hillary Clinton. She's already declared she's going to run in 2020. And unless he can convict her of a felony, she's going to be eligible to run in 2020. Just going on up there with her little stroller and everything. All right, Alex, we're going to let you go here and switch over to Pat in Arkansas. Aloha, Pat. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I just heard you mention something about organic farming.
Yes.
And this has been a particular interest of mine for about 30 years. But believe it or not, in areas of the mainland here, like in Missouri and Arkansas and up in Oregon, there's a positive wind blowing. If you could mention this, Baker's Creek Heirloom Seed Planting Festival, and this is where anybody can take part and be a grower. And this is a small farm in southern Missouri in the backwoods, and they had over 10,000 people in 2 days. It was a mob.
I can believe it, but you know, the USDA is now trying to crack down on these heirloom seed libraries under this flimsy excuse that you don't really know if the seeds are safe or not, and there could be moles and pesticides and stuff. And again, the goal is to make you dependent on companies like Monsanto simply to grow your own food. To end the heritage seeds, and it may have been intentional on Monsanto's part that the honeybees are driven to extinction, because without the honeybees, natural organic farming is it's very, very difficult, if not impossible.
Yeah, you're right there. I was just wondering if you could put that information up about.
All right, what was the name of that again?
Baker's Creek Heirloom Seeds is in Mansfield, Missouri. Their spring planting festival. It's around the 1st of May.
All right, I will hunt them down here, and I will put that up on the website as well. And I hope the USDA isn't going to give you a lot of grief. But we've been hearing about some of these heirloom seed libraries, community collectives. Nobody's making money off of it. They're just trying to have a seed bank, and the USDA is trying to shut them down.
Yeah, no, they know that. They check their heirloom seeds, and he's been in the seed-saving business for years and years. It's a private farm, but I found that remarkable that 10,000 people would show up in 2 days. It was wall-to-wall people. So I'll let you go. I thought I would just mention that to you. There are a lot of people taking part.
Okay, well, that's a good thing because, again, the real problem with this GMO seed issue is if we're all forced to be dependent on these GMO seeds and there are no more heirloom seeds and natural varieties, what happens when, as eventually is always the case, they make a mistake and produce a seed that can't actually grow a usable crop? That happened in India. They're finding out already that many of these GMO food crops are producing inferior yields, less food for all the work and cost going into them. What happens if they make a mistake where all of a sudden they can't even make their seeds anymore? We have seen industrial disasters like this before, but never has an entire planet been held hostage to this. Okay?
Yeah, I understand. This is just, well, it must be a big movement here and there, but you don't hear about it because, you know, it's a small farm out in the backwoods, but it's heirlooming. It can be a hands-on thing. They have their growers.
Yeah.
And that's their biggest event of the year, their spring planting festival.
All right, well,
and I found it very interesting that so many people were taking part.
Actually, it's a very
Monsanto, it doesn't get on mainstream media.
Well, no, it's not going to.
If you could mention it, I'd appreciate it.
I just did mention it, and
thanks a lot.
Okay, bye. We're going to let you go, Pat. All right, I guess the phone wasn't working. actually, if you go on out to small community organizations, community farms websites, you will find out this is a very popular movement. Corporate media doesn't want to report on it. Corporate media serves the interests of the large corporations, and the goal of the large GMO corporations is that you will be dependent on them to grow, produce any kind of food in the future. Just like the U.S. plan following Bretton Woods was to make every nation on earth dependent on the U.S. dollar for all cross-border trade and banking. The establishment of a monopoly, and monopoly and dependency represents slavery. All right, Rick in Fort Lauderdale, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Hey, just in reference to George Soros being the head of the snake, in irony, I'm just kind of coming on the coattails of one of the things you posted on Investment Watch blog about the snake is eating its own tail.
Yes.
Well, since this enemy of liberty is a centralized form, kind of like a Soviet bloc central form down, there's a point or a pinnacle. And if George Soros stopped breathing, and I'm not advocating anything in particular, I'm just saying that should nature take its course or be expedited or any of the above, I think that it would be very easy to watch this all fall apart real quickly.
Well, like I said, I'm seeing a lot of parallels between the attempt to start a color revolution here in the United States of America and the attempt to overthrow Iran back in 2009, to repeat the glorious success of 1953. And what happened in 2009 was the plotters, the coup plotters, were unable to capture the imagination, the sympathy, the support of the general population. And when it really began to come apart was when the population of Iran was made aware that the plan was to put the son of the Shah back on the throne of Iran. And that was the death blow to that whole situation. So I see the same thing happening here, because no matter what these Soros-funded rioters are doing, it's generating negative publicity. People are not hopping on board. They're not seeing this as anything that they can sympathize with. In fact, frankly, they're sick and tired of all the whining. And if Washington, D.C. continues down that same path of, we're just going to blockade Trump and we're going to behave like children, we're going to reach a point where the American people are just going to stand up and say, all right, that's our capital city. All of you get out. Out of the pool. Time out. Just get on out. And it may be up to the American people to drain that swamp. Because I got to tell you, I am absolutely ashamed of the behavior of our politicians right now. Okay? Sorry, I got to let you go. Got to do a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today. And this mania of trying to just link anything bad going on with Russia has really reached a nadir. Over at governmentslaves.info, they're running a story on how the leader of the Collexit movement, that's the secessionist movement in California, is now called into question for ties to Russia. See, it's those evil Russians. The Russians are hacking the climate. That's why the global warming predictions all failed. Another story coming out of Government Slaves that confirms the Obama holdovers were behind the campaign to oust Flynn. It's amazing here. Here's a bizarre story over in Los Angeles County. Man has been charged with animal cruelty after allegedly throwing a dog off a 145-foot cliff twice. I'm not sure why he felt he needed to do it twice. But the dog was named Mary Jane and was simply thrown off a cliff into a ravine. The man was arrested, charged with animal custody. His bail is set at $65,000, and he faces a maximum sentence of 3 years and 8 months in jail if convicted on the charges. But Hillary Clinton says it's perfectly okay to kill an unborn human being right up to the moment of birth, which tells you just how la-la land the liberals have gotten. I'm beginning to really see almost a self-hatred among liberals, where they're out there just saying it's okay to kill people, it's okay to kill normal white working people, and we're all going to celebrate all these fluffy types. And it's always, if you're going to have respect for life, it has to be for all life. And sometimes I'm almost seeing among liberalism, and especially in the environmental wackos, where they love all of planet Earth and all of nature except themselves, which they then project onto other human beings. And we have seen some of these environmental wackos come on out with statements about how the human race is actually a cancer on the planet, and the planet would be so much better off without us. No, it wouldn't. The planet's the planet. The planet's always been the planet since it was created. I'm part of nature. And because humans are, by their nature, tool makers, all this computer equipment is part of nature. If you really think about it seriously, there is nothing that exists that isn't part of nature. Unless you define nature down to be this artificial construct of we say this is nature and that is not. And what we say is nature is good, and what we have arbitrarily decided is not nature is bad and must be removed. And that's rather arbitrary. It's like this argument over climate change. We're going to stop climate change. Okay, who decides what the ideal climate's going to be? Because what's an ideal climate for people on the equator is not very good for the people at the poles. And what's an ideal climate for the people at the poles is not very good for the people on the equator. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Have a happy Valentine's Day evening. I hope you've got a hot date. And remember, the initials of Valentine's Day are VD, so use your common sense. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.